Hi, aloha no kako. Tiffany, am I alive here? Is this happening? Okay, I see all of you. Okay. Hi, Akia Makamai Princess. Nice to see all of your faces. Um, we're in a Mōkaulele series, and Mōkaulele is a platform to grow leadership. One year, Mōkaulele was focused on hula and and hula's contribution to the indigenous leadership of 2020. This year, we're focused on the material arts, culture, and innovations, and how do they inform, guide, grow, hold in account indigenous leadership. And so, when Gail Makuakane London, who is over there, this is being supported by the Kipuka Native Success Center of UH Hilo and Hawaii Community College and our related chancellor's office. But when Gail says, yes, let's do more kaulele, so typical, yeah. I go call all my friends because that's what you start with. Call the people you know. You cannot call the stranger too much because you don't know what they're going to say out of their mouth. They might say something that don't really agree with where we're going to go with this. So we start with our friends. And Hanalei has been a scholar in residence with UH for multiple years. We've traveled together. We're an odd couple because he's like 7 foot and I'm like 5'5", and then I'm really emotional, and then he just contained. But we spend a lot of magic hours talking about things that sometimes is difficult to talk with other people if they don't have the similar questions in life. And one of which is, how does ʻAʻahu, what we wear, how does that matter in leadership? What is its contribution to leadership? So without further ado, this is Hanalei. He can tell you who he is professionally, culturally, but I just want to let you know that he's my friend, so I trust him. And if he says anything that don't agree with you, then I don't know you, so I give you time to go and figure it out. But I trust him 100%. And the great thing with sharing knowledge is there's definitely going to be moments when we go, yeah, those are my very words. Or, wow, I never thought about it this way. And so let's celebrate that our ancestors, and they left us plenty stuff. They left us exactly what we needed to sustain healthier generations and to grow vibrant Hawaii. Okay, so Hanalei Marzan, o'oia.
Mahalo nui. I just want to start. Yeah, I'll share my screen, and then I just want to begin by just sharing a little bit about myself. I was born and raised on the island of Oahu in Kaneohe in He'eia. Went to public school, and then went to University of Hawaii and got my degree in fine arts, a bachelor's degree in fine arts with particular emphasis in fiber, in textiles. Then later on, um, I was able to to do an internship at the Bishop Museum, where I was able to learn from the collections and the mea kupuna, mea makamai held at the Bishop Museum. Um, and fortunately enough, I was able to apply for a position that opened up, an entry-level technician position that opened up and allowed me to continue my journey of caring for those mea kupuna at the museum, but also learning from them as well along the way. And now currently I serve as the museum's cultural advisor. But like Tangaro was saying, I've had the opportunity to travel throughout the Pacific and around the world, really, and to share my own experiences from the things that were taught to me by my kupuna, both physical and inanimate. Those mea kupuna in museum collections, in family homes, and just pictures really speak volumes if you understand the the language that they care for and carry. Yeah, so I just wanted to share a little bit about myself in the beginning. Um, and again, my kupuna and my connections through my first art form in practice that I learned while I was still in high school was lauhala, ulana lauhala, with Auntie Minerva Ka'ava. and she held classes at the Bishop Museum. And I took a summer workshop, and it just opened my eyes to a new world. You know, I always wished to learn from my family and Ohana, some of the practices from my kupuna, but no one actually learned from them. So I had to go out and find those kupuna willing to share with me some of those practices and ike, so that I could reawaken that mana within my ohana, and really bring bring some of um, those those things that my tutu made for my ohana, papale, kapakuiki, you know, other forms of things, and really kind of reanimate and bring life back to those things, and really talk about the significance. So just wanted to share a little bit about that before I began. And yeah, my like Tangaro mentioned, my particular presentation is about ritual wear, but and how those things really connect with ourselves today. So I'm just going to show a couple of images of things in a museum setting from our kupuna, as well as things that I've created along the way. So let's try and start this. I kulani ha ko I ka olu e kau mai ka awa mo ke kule ana ha'awe velehia ka umeke heke ie ka ua ko kole hua ka puu I loko nei a ki kepa I kua hia ka ipu pawe he aia I luna pihano ke opu halau ka hue wai e kau lei ka awa mo e hapa I kaupono he aloha I ke aloha. I think we're all familiar. We always acknowledge all of those, our kupuna, and all of those energies and wahipana and places that connect to us spiritually, physically, and acknowledge their presence as they make up who we are. Yeah, they really are our connection to our world, and they create those relationships with all of us. So just to begin acknowledging all of those energies, the things that inspire us both creatively, in everything that we do. Yeah, it's just that acknowledgement. But again, when we think about those things that surround us, it really is the pilina, the relationship that exists, and the binding together of various elements, the connecting of those various elements together, that really provide that story and um, grounding, meaningful connection that we have. Yeah. So in the connection to some of the mea kupuna housed at in various repositories. These are actually a couple of pieces from the Bishop Museum, but you know, these pieces, Mahiole Hulu work, they were made for a specific purpose, intention, for ali'i, specific ali'i, as symbols of who they were, their mana and authority and kuleana that they cared for. But they also represent the connection and pilina to the community that they represented. Yeah, these wouldn't have been made without their support. The people that carry the knowledge in going and you know, caring for the various materials, the olona in this instance, the backing for the ahula and a lot of featherwork is very much tied to the production and use of olona, our strongest natural fiber on the planet. The kia manu that would go up into the mountains, that knew the various places that cared for and that provided the homes for our manu, that that provided these beautiful colors, the yellow and red feathers. The kupuna themselves that provided lauoho in these examples of leniho palawa. You know, again, it's that relationship and connection that we have with one another and how they are visually presented and in various ways. You know, so in these examples of regalia for ali'i, historically, they do um, they do show that connection very well physically by the material choices, by the techniques and mana and time imbued into each of those pieces. Um, and then it again speaks to the relationships that exist. A lot of people think of these being the symbols of rank and authority and privilege, but also they are symbols of responsibility and duty to the people that they represent. Yeah, so it is that back and forth acknowledgement that exists in these pieces from our kupuna. And again, you know, these are just a couple of examples that I'm showing of some of our more kind of chiefly related materials, but that they exist in our everyday materials, our kama'a, our moena, all of those basic materials that we use on a daily basis, and our kupuna use on a daily basis, that really still speaks to those connections and responsibilities to one another. Yeah. So I know this is one of Tangaro's very special pieces that he regards as a kupuna that spoke to him at an early age. But you know, these are examples of how we can connect and be inspired by our kupuna, and how we can bring some of these elements that may exist in Mo'olelo, and in this case, in this one lone example of a ki'i that still retains this this netted or cord skirt um, that has been talked about in Mele, Oli, various Mo'olelo, but how we can bring that to life today based off of these connections. So, you know, Tangro, myself, and Keli'i, Rachel, a number of other practitioners in Hawaii have been trying to preserve the art of upena, kokopu'u, kaula, ʻaʻahu, all those various materials that speak to um, to those various techniques, and this is something that I created that is inspired and draws that inspiration and creative spark from that key that previously showed. So, but when we think about ʻAʻahu, it's not just the physical body. It is the ʻAʻahu for the things that we care for. Omole wai, our everyday bottles. You know, the havele that surrounded the ipu of our kupuna, our hue wai. So again, it really does. It's something that we need to think about. That it's not just on the physical body when we think about regalia and clothing and ritual wear. It's all of the practices that we incorporate into our daily life, into our ceremonial life, into all of those events that make up our waking moments here on this plane. So, you know, the speaking to the techniques, the fibers, the materials, but again, how we bring those things to life. Yeah, the act of doing something is one aspect, but how we make those relevant and meaningful to each other and to our community is actually the essence of what living means. Yeah, it doesn't that's the art. Um, we speak of a difference between craft and art. You know, there is that difference. To me, art is the living aspect of those practices passed down from our kupuna, or the things that we create ourselves, that we perpetuate. That meaningful connection that we care for. And again, this is a very basic concept and understanding, but I think when we get down to the basic materials, those are the things that really matter. That is the foundation of how we can grow, how we continue, and how we can move forward. And if we have that strong base, we know that the direction that we'll go in will be the right one. So, you know, Papale was something that was an inspiration for me growing up. My tutu Kokahishi, she was a lauhala weaver from Honaunau. And you know, growing up, I always looked at some of those papale that she made, and I always wanted to learn how to make it, but no one could teach me it within my ohana. So when I was able to learn from Kupuna this practice, it just made it alive again for me. It was no longer just this thing that I looked at and that sat in the closet of, you know, my mom's closet, that, or, you know, on the table. It was something that I could bring a new conversation, a new life, a new relevance for myself, as well as my ohana and all of those interested in learning. So keeping those aspects alive is very important, but how we give those things life is also very much important. Yeah. So this is a moena makaloa, known as the protest mat. And this is the only known moena makaloa mat that has an entire letter written on its surface. It was written and woven by a weaver from Kauai, um, and her name was Kala'i Kamalino. And this letter actually speaks to the times, the current events of the time that she lived. So the taxes that were being imposed on the citizens of Hawaii in the 1870s, and particularly a tax on animals and pets. So, you know, this was a living message on preserving community knowledge through the practice and techniques, but also speaking to the events of the time and how things like these change the course of history. And again, speaking to all of those connections, the relevance of what Moena Makaloa represented at the times, things of prestige like this, no one being able to reproduce something like this, really made the message a lot stronger. And I think that's what we have to think about when we think about those things that we choose to create for ourselves or use to adorn those things that are important to us in various forms. So this is a small makaloa mat that I was able to create, that again pays tribute to all of the makaloa, Moena makaloa weavers of our past. And hopefully, you know, we have more younger generations wanting to take up the mantle of speaking and preserving some of these particular skills and knowledge bases, but also providing them a living context to be used today. Yeah. So, you know, being able to go and experience collections in Hawaii, around the world, to just learn, you know, have the conversation with these mea kupuna. You know, a lot of people don't have a lot of familiarity with various things, and sometimes it's just seeing them just gives them the joy and pride of the things that our kupuna created. But for me, these actually speak to me. Yeah, they tell me their story. They tell me the unique situations in which they were created, and how those things can kind of really speak to me and my practice, and how I can evolve the things that I do. So this is something that I created to really to honor that dialogue, and offered back to the British Museum. You know, the images, the previous images were was an experience I had when visiting London and seeing the collection there. And this is my makana back to them, to have conversations with those kupuna and have that living dialogue and connection. So again, you know, every every piece brings a new experience, a new thing that opens up in my eye. Everything is a teaching tool. Just because I've made dozens of these now since I began, everyone is completely different. They have taught me something different every time. So again, trying to make sure we keep ourselves open to those things that we have no control over. Sometimes we find things in very unexpected ways, and I've been fortunate to be a part of the Mauli Wearable Arts Show for a number of years now here in Hawaii. And these are some of the pieces that I've created over the year, the various collections I've done over the year that really speak to my conversations for that time. My connection and my interest and connection to upena, and how that evolved into this open work felting technique, and that exchange and dialogue, and those connections with that. My connection to the pe'ahi and how I interpret some of those in this particular connection, connecting to materials, and imbuing the various materials, the mesh, the beaded mesh work that you see on a number of these pieces are made from ohe, beads, bamboo beads that I assembled, to really speak to that connection of the upena, and how the upena and the koko pu'u and all of those things that bind us together really surround us throughout our life. From the time we were born till the end of our days, from we hear it so often in many of our chants, the various epithets that happen at the very end, palalauhala, haumaka'iole, kolopupu, kaikoko, all of these these terms at the end talk about the longevity and life that we live and hope to aspire to, but also those particular ones like the kaikoko, the one that is carried within the net, the kolopupu, those things that speak to those connections. I think just is something that we all resonate with, yeah, and how we can connect and engage with those pieces is something that I've done. I really love to have that conversation with, and this is an installation that I created back in 2017 for the Honolulu Biennial, and it was my my homage to the Kiniakua. In particular, it was actually called ʻAʻahu Kinolau. It was this three-dimensional representations of our akua, two-dimensional represent the lepa, kilepa on the walls that represent them, but also the third component, the living component, the mana that resides within ourselves, and how we can imbue moments and provide that connection and relevance. So the procession of living people throughout the space to ho'omana, the conversation of what I was hoping to present to the community. So to have the two-dimensional, to have the three-dimensional static forms, but to also engage the living, the space between, and that we all exist in, and how we engage with those various ideas and forms and connections. I've had the opportunity to travel to a number of institutions to honor our kupuna in various forms. This is one example that myself and a number of other of our community members and local practitioners were engaged in the re-display of one of our mea kupuna held at the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, Massachusetts, one of three large ku images that still exist in the world. So they, to have those conversations with institutions like the Peabody Essex and their desire to do things right and to honor the host cultures from which the materials that they care for in meaningful ways and appropriate ways. So to have those conversations and allow us the opportunity to be a part of the rededication of images like these back onto display and their appropriate placement within their exhibition spaces and all of these different things. It really is the empowerment of our community, and providing those moments, um, both intellectually is very stimulating, but also in the ceremonial living aspect, uh, to engage in all of the forms of ku in this instance, having the aha, having um, the kupe'e, having all of these different kinds of things that connect to and really pay special honor to those moments is what we all need to remember. Yeah, and again, I've been fortunate enough to be able to share what I've been able to, with various peoples within the community, and you know, again, for me, it really is my journey that I've had over, learning from various kupuna, learning from the things in museums, my own personal exploration, and really bringing all of those elements together. This particular garment on this, in this image, is actually made out of na'au pua'a, and the idea of bringing those different kinds of elements together, in various forms, it allows us to have different conversations, and what kinds of things we really want to um, convey, in meaningful ways. So, again, connecting with our materials, connecting with our environment, um, and connecting with our community is something that I think we all aspire to, right? And hopefully with these conscious awarenesses of what we have around us, we can do that. And then again, this is a collaboration that I started with a Native Hawaiian choreographer on the East Coast, Christopher Morgan, and him speaking to his passion and his drive that moves him to create the things that he does, and wanting to have a conversation with me in my practice, and how I can bring the bring or complement some of the things that he is doing. So to have pieces come to life in various ways is I think the most important thing from my perspective, to really, to give things life in all forms. You can have the very high ritual, and ceremony forms that is very, um, um, very appropriate, but also we have to think about the things that, in our daily life as well, and all of the other forms that exist, in our arts, and even though some of the things might be so different, in this point, this is contemporary dance. Yeah, it's not something that our kupuna did, contemporary dance in this way, but it still speaks to our relevance and relationship we have with ourselves and our connections to the community, and how we can engage and ho'omana and bring and uplift, everyone together collectively. I think is the is the is the thing that I want to convey in this short time that I have. Um, but again, I think that's basically what I wanted to share, and hopefully we can continue this conversation with some questions. So mahalo nui.
Hanalei, there was one question someone asked, regarding the palawa, the lei miho palawa, and specific the braids. They wanted to know how many strands is typical to that culture of miho palawa.
It varies actually. Every palawa is very different, depending on when they were made. There were various techniques to kind of disguise or make it look like an older form. But the earliest palawa were all a three braid. Just really fine three braid, um, with the lauho, the human hair. Then it progressed into a more fine and, actually very intricately fine, 8-ply braid. And, um, you know, I think just by thinking of some of those really delicate ones, probably 10 strands of hair per ply. So, you know,
Mm-hmm.
80 strands of hair maybe to make the a single braid. And when you look at the palawa, you think they're all individual strands, but they're actually the majority of them actually is one long continuous cord where the hair
Mm.
is braided and and added on and continued on. So it's hundreds of feet long. And to have the consistency and you know the tension and all of those things is so amazing to me to just know that our kupuna were that mayo and dexterous with their hands that they could do that. You know, I don't know of anyone today that has that that has been able to replicate some of those really fine braids in that same fashion. Um, so yeah, it's something that we all, even practitioners today, aspire to. You know, to,
One person asked, how did our kupuna collect the hair? So I guess what was the protocol
um,
regarding the collection of hair?
Yeah, so there's various mo'olelo that have been recorded over time. The just the natural, you know, brushing of the hair and the hair that has fallen naturally fallen from your po'o was collected and gathered and offered. And in other instances, hair was actually cut, you know, and given and offered as the ho'okupua, the makana to the ali'i, to offer that commitment of that individual, that ohana, to the safeguard and you know protection of that of their ali'i. So there's various um, ways in which hair was acquired for the use of palawa. But again, I think the intention for each example um, made the difference on how and when it was
Mm.
used. Yeah. So typically, you know, the natural falling out of hair is provides the full mana. Yeah, something that has grown and has naturally shed itself from our po'o, so it retains all of its mana. Whereas you know there's other mo'olelo of the cutting of hair, that oki of hair severs that connection in one aspect.
Mm-hmm.
But in that mo'olelo of people offering it as their ho'okupu, that severing is actually the intention. Yeah, they are purposefully intending severing it for that function. So again, the um, how we relate to everything is very important on the practice. You know, the Tangaro and I were actually speaking a little earlier about you know different crafts, you know, craft versus art, and how you know sometimes craft preserve the technique and practice, the knowledge and story, but how we bring that to life today is the art. Yeah, um, and and again, when we look at how we make those engagements and intentional acts of commitment and purpose, that really to me is how we can bring craft into art and to living practice.
Okay. One of the questions here is, Aloha Hanalei, how long did it take to complete your first showing of wearable art?
Um, well, let's see. Uh, well, the first wearable art show, I believe it was in like 2000 and was it 2006? I think 2006 or 2005, um, here on Oahu. And Auntie Vicky Holt Takamine, she just reached out to me and asked if I had anything that could be used in the wearable art show. And, you know, at that time, I actually was traveling and couldn't actually be physically present at that moment. But she's like, just give me whatever you got and I'll go make it work. You know, so, you know, that particular collection of materials really was just art that I created in the moment that just so happened lived on a human form, yeah, and was to be presented on a human body. Um,
So I
yeah,
have
it really shit. Yeah,
an intriguing growth that is, um, I think it's just organic to the culture whenever we bring something alive again, such as um, when we began to revitalize the Hawaiian language, then all these other things got revitalized. Even
yeah,
the people that were dancing hula all their lives for many generations, once they began to teach and think hula through the Hawaiian language systems, things got revitalized. Now, how does that impact leadership in as it relates to regalia when um, people are asking you to provide essentials, protocols, essentials, by way of clothing, whether capes or cords and um, you noted that, that it wasn't just about rank, that wearing these things was about response kuleana to community, that it was sometimes a heavy thing to wear such regalia. Now, how do you negotiate when somebody come up to you and says, Hanalei, I want you to, I want you to, I want to commission you to do this so I can wear it. I mean, just as you say, the hair for the niho palawa doesn't come from just one way. There's many ways of getting that hair. So that's great to know that there's not just one way. So what are the ways you negotiate when perhaps somebody's asking for something that maybe in your mind, because you're the creator, so there's part of your energy in that, and in your mind you're thinking, maybe there's a little bit more maturity that needs to come with wearing this. How do you negotiate that in 2020?
yeah. I've had that. I've been asking myself that question for a long time, and I've had all these varying things, and I think one experience that I have kind of really speaks to it. There's a really well-known artist, Maori painter in Aotearoa, and he is very successful, very known within the community, respected elder, and he just is very prolific in his painting styles, and he paints and that currently is his primary source of income. It provides the resources and things for himself and his family. So there's that. But when we asked him that question, how do you sell your art, or what is that thing for you and the connection for you with your art? And he says, well, I make art for my life, but I also make art for my ohana, and I make art for those special people within my life. And those two things, they might look exactly the same, but they're completely on opposite ends of the spectrum.
Perfect.
For him.
Perfect.
So it's the intention that he imbues into those things. And I think that really speaks to how I do a lot of my my own engagements with people like that request certain things. I ask, I'd like to get to know them a little bit better, and understand the intention and purpose of the different things that they're requesting. But I don't imbue, in those instances, I don't imbue the same kind of mana and same kind of pule and energy into those kinds of pieces versus the things that are made specifically for function, a ceremony, or a very specific intention. And I think that's where the life, the energy resides. Yeah, they might look exactly the same, but they're not at all the same.
So, you know, we have this tradition, and I can relate to this through hula, in that you can do the same dance. You can do the same dance, and but one of them is, in the case of hula pele, you can do the hula pele. You can either present the dance as a dance about pele, or that same choreography, you allow pele to dance through you. It's the same dance, and I think that is quite empowering when because some of the questions that I have to face in my work in the university is when some of our students need to question some of those artifacts that are in world depositories and outside of Hawaii. And you know, and initially, you know, the response is we got to get them all back. And so it's a real discussion. And for people that have to decolonize our community, you know, we need to reassemble our knowledge systems, because these are not just flat, you know, objects. They actually, you know, they actually have a story to tell. But then, you know, we begin to questions of the Kanaka, you know, and we still know this because we still have this practice. We got to give something, but we don't have to give everything. And the artifact may look exactly the same, but one has the mana, one just has the form. And we do this in hula a lot. You know, we don't teach the most ritualistic dances to just anyone. That is reserved for a particular kind of maturity and sometimes genealogy. And then we have others that might look very similar, and they're the ones that we can give. So some of the students ask, you know, how could the ancestors give away these big capes and these, and some of these people are descendants of these capes, and largely they would like to have it back. So I said, well, you know, I think this is a discussion that you need to think about and you need to answer. But there's a huge ritual in giving. The giving has a lot to do with trust. The giving is a lot to do with opening up relationships, growing relationships, and but one ki'i doesn't necessarily. You can have a ki'i, but does it really have the mana? You know, and so those are the questions. Sometimes it's best not to even answer those questions because they have to answer those questions themselves. But also, how do you honor the person that gived it? Because that's the gift, is that the person that gives it for whatever purpose. So I don't know the answer to that, because they're actually quite, you know, depending on the context of the situation and the maturity of the person that's hosting the discussion. But also to know that they might look the same, but they may not have the same imbuing of energy, which turns them largely into different, that allows us to give and then to be selective on how we give. There are two questions here. One of them here is, Kavehi says, when did Hanalei come to that point that told him that he has that deep, deep skills to do what he do? When did he sense that point in his life? Spill it, Hanalei, spill it. We want to know.
No. So actually, it was, for me, the turning point was that first Lauhala class that I took with Auntie Minerva Ka'ava, you know, while I was in college, while I was in high school. You know, because that was the first time I touched Lauhala and learned from someone on Lauhala, and it just came so naturally to me, as if my hands were not my hands at all. They were as my kupuna coming through me. And even my teacher, my kumu, was like, "Oh, you're too fast. What? I don't have enough projects for you right now. Wait, hold on. Next week I come back. I'll give you something." And you know, I think that really was an eye-opening thing for me. That, you know, I was not the person that, you know, my ambition or anything wasn't what was driving this forward. It was something that was innate within me that was coming out.
Great.
That's, I think for me, that was my recognition of like, okay, this is my kuleana. This is something that was passed down through me, that is coming out right now. And I'm gonna move and make this pono and teach whoever I can and learn as much as I can so I could share that information.
This is a fine example of what why we use we create platforms for Indigenous art in academia, because oftentimes we come from the belief that we're part ancestor. We part our own ancestors. They live in us. But how do you access that knowledge? How do you access that connection? And we deliberately put traditional arts and crafts or culture in that, we bring it into that space, because when we believe that when you pick something up traditionally that is familiar to your ancestors, then it brings them closer to that participation. When all we do is things that are very foreign and to them, then they have no opportunity to come forward. But you just make a great case that you've never touched lauhala before, but you had evidence that your tutu them did lauhala, you always wanted it, and when you touched it, everything was awakened. Your teacher couldn't keep up with you. I think that's a great indicator that sometimes, and we think we want to do lauhala. We know a lot of people want to do lauhala, and the first one, kind of pupuka, yeah, you got to chum in the fire, or you got to do something. Sometimes we think we want to do something, and we try it, and we find out that the tingle is not the same, and then the tingle comes through another means. The great thing is we have multiple ancestors in us, and so I think I think it has to do with just timing, reality, and they will work. Here's one says over here from Tori, what is the history of the knotted kihei?
So I think Tangaro, myself, have brought the knot work in ʻAʻahu to a more pronounced place today. We have those mo'olelo of the pa'u, the cord skirts, from pa'u ukia, hi'aka had her pa'u palai, all these varying things that reference the cord or the knotting into those kinds of ʻAʻahu. And then the reference to cord skirts or pa'u being used by the masters of varying disciplines, the loea, of different art practices. Lua, hula, kalaiba'a, all these varying disciplines, speak to this connection to the highest, when you attain that kulana and kuleana, you are recognized in various forms, and in that particular time and context, yeah, it was a cord skirt. But I think, again, much like the conversation that Tagoro has brought to life from his experience with engaging with that ki'i that's in the Bishop Museum's care, and then our conversations today, how we bring some of those mo'olelo, that memory that exists within us today, out and into our living world, and how we can make those very meaningful and intentional connections that speak to those ties to our kupuna, but how we can tie to our kupuna and into the future.
Okay, mahalo nui. We do have someone by the name of Joseph Certeza. Could that be reflective with the concept of craft and art? And I think he's referencing similarly looking, identical in look, but different in energy. And can one define the art and the other define craft? And how do they play in your creative world?
Yeah. So for me, again, it's the living people that make that distinction. Yeah. If you completely take the community, take the people out of the context, you have things, yeah, that have no context. Um, but if you are able, and if you still retain that connection to the people and the stories and the events that made those things come to life, that is the mana. That's where the mana resides. Um, so again, um, it's a switch in emphasis. It's no longer on the things themselves, but the people and relationships that exist that bring those things to life.
And I think one of the culture of Mayau, no matter if it's craft for a topical exchange or if it's for ritual, which is a deep marrow exchange, the craft is 100% beautiful. You know, so one doesn't get less detailed attention. They get the both detailed attention. It's just that one is made within a particular kind of a focus. And that's the difference between the hula person that can actually go and buy a hula skirt and a hula person that actually has to make a hula skirt. The audience sometimes don't know what is purchased and what was made. But to the dancer, they dance different when they actually put their sweat, or even higher yet, a community has created a skirt for them and all of their mana is in that skirt and present. We still have that culture of creating things and giving. It's interesting because it's like, yeah, we honor you, but the receiving of it is meaning we need for you to work harder for us. So
Yeah.
sometimes, there's a tradition, not because they offer you a lei that you have to actually wear it. Sometimes you can just hold the lei in your hand, because the old tradition is if you put that lei on, you become committed. So some of our old people, Iolani Luahine was known to not always wear every lei that was offered, or sometimes she just honor it by holding it. Okay, this is a good question, Hanalei, and I want to see how you're going to answer this one, buddy.
Okay.
But again, if anything that Hawaii can teach the world is that if you ask any two Hawaiians what they think about one phenomena, they're going to come up with 5 different realities. Yeah, you can ask two kumuhula from the same halau, explain this, please, and they're going to take different takes on it. And I think that's a magical piece, so that we don't have to spend our lives dismantling what people are doing. We can spend our lives creating. And so I want you to, this is a question from Yuntaku. Aloha e Hanalei. For the lei niho palawa, it seems that it was mainly for the ali'i. Do you see it being part of general public people's lives now? If so, in what form? For example, should we gather our hair and weave it, or even offer it to someone? Please forgive me if this question is rather unknowing. Mahalo a me ke aloha. Good
Yeah.
question.
Yes, that's a good question. Again, it's the context of what it represented. Yeah. So the Leni Hopalawa was something that was identified or connected to the Ali, because it was a symbol of a community's commitment and support. Yeah. And that's how it was. That's its main function for the ali'i. It is showing that particular person had the backing of a community that will support them, feed them, do everything that they could to make them, to uplift them. But again, it is that double-edged sword. When you have that kind of support from the community, you have a kuleana. You have that responsibility, that um, reciprocal duty to make sure that all of those things occur. Yeah. So I think today, we don't have the same structures that we had in our past. But I think what the Palawa represented, that commitment to one's community, or the recognition of a community for the actions and service of particular people within the community. Sometimes even recognition within an ohana. It's the same thing. How do we make sure that we can honor and support one another in various forms? And I think how we take some of those older practices and how we make them relevant to ourselves and our space today, is a very important one. Um, it speaks to our connection to our kupuna, um, definitely through the form and materials and everything, but how we bring those things to life today, I think is the most impactful thing that I take from the things that I've learned from kupuna, from mea kupuna, and all these varying forms, that they were creative processes of the time. Yeah, the leni hopalawa, the practice of making them was a creative process back in 200, 300, 400 years ago by our kupuna. Um, that was special and meaningful to them. Sometimes it was a creative process, very innovative and new at a specific time. But when we think about it now, it is our past, it is our tradition. That's what we look to as a traditional old practice. So we have to turn the conversation and think of a continuum versus a linear, what's in the back and we have to think about how they're all connected together, and how our creations and innovations today will be our traditional practices for our future generations, and how we connect and speak to the same stories that we have within each generation, but how it manifests itself in the present.
Well said. I think my default of being married to a family that is intrinsic in some of the rituals that we do on our island statewide, and sometimes beyond. As an in-law, I get caught into that, and as a not just an in-law, but as a student of hula, my mother-in-law being my teacher, there's we get exposed to certain thresholds, and we have to perform, and we have to connect. We use chants to connect and to grow and to empower, and with it comes certain regalia. But it's interesting that once somebody offered me, in mahalo for what I was doing, they offered me this feather cape. And I kind of got really emotional because one, I didn't know it was for me. I just thought this person was made a feather cape, and I thought we was gonna have a conversation, but they wanted to put it on my shoulders, and I kind of just I kind of snaked out of it. And I think I'm not the only person like that. So even though the conversation is changing, we want to look at the continuum. There's a part of our memory is still honoring a part of the past that we're not willing to. There's a little wrinkle in time. We're having to figure that out, So, and I didn't want to hurt the maker's feelings because it came with so much aloha. But nor did I want, because part of wearing this is you giving a perception of who you are in the community. And in Hawaii, we're still connected to community. What the community thinks of us is very important. We like to say, well, me, I, and I don't care what you think, but in Hawaii, what the community think of you, the value the community has on you has a lot to do with how happy we are and how functioning we are. So I was not able to wear that feather on my shoulders because in my mind, it's still reserved not for me. One, I didn't want to wear it because if I have to wear it that way, that means I'm going to have to work harder. And I was already working hard. But what I did do was I wore it as a pa'u, and I dedicated it as a pa'u. Because as a pa'u, I could use it to dance hula. I was given license to dance. And so sometimes we still have those, there's glitches. There's time glitches because we were never designed just to be holy to just this date, November 18th to the 2020. We're committed and we're attached to a larger reality. And so sometimes in the arts, there are these glitches. When somebody want to give you I remember somebody gave my wife their family lei palawa. It was a small one with beads. And my wife goes, what are you going to do with this? Because she couldn't wear it because in her mind, her interpretation is it doesn't align with my service of who I think I am and how I service. But what she was able to do is hold it and secure it for that family. Because one day that Mo'opuna will come by and he's going to need that palawa. And we can give that palawa back. So not because we're given, that means we need to use it. Sometimes our job is just to hold it. We do have another one. One of them is, can you talk about the meaning of the pig gut? Let's go back to the na'au.
Yeah. So for that, in that particular instance, I was speaking to the idea that we in Hawaii, who we are resides within our na'au. Yeah, so we are very protective of who we share ourselves with. But in that particular conversation, I wanted to turn that around and make those things that are invisible visible. Yeah, and those things within, and bring that out. So it really was that the conversation of being vulnerable and making and presenting myself in my truest form to everyone, and letting everyone see me from that angle. So again, the na'au tradition is something in the use of in that particular technique of preparing the material is something that I learned from one of my teachers at the University of Hawaii, who did who did a lot of study and practice with the native peoples of Alaska, who use the seal intestine to make clothing. Yeah, they make their rain parkas out of the seal intestine, and they dry it and everything. And so that particular use of the na'au in that way was a connection through my teaching from my teacher at with that experience. But also I interpreted the use of the material in a very Hawaiian kind of context, and how that represents how that represents and relates to me. Yeah, so that's how the na'au came about.
A couple of things. Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached the 5 o'clock hour, but this discussion, if we could extend it by 5 more minutes. But if you have to leave, bye-bye. Thank you for joining. We hope there's something for you to think about. Answers are nice, but we rather that you create more questions, because those questions are going to really make those answers worthwhile when you arrive at them. December the 3rd, the same time, same day, is going to be Charles Auli'i Mitchell, that will be sharing a particular legacy of his family, and this is regarding the hula ki'i, the dancing using figures to dance, carved figures. So it's now becoming more visible in Hawaii, but it's still quite abstract. It's still quite esoteric. So I think you want to join us to see how we interpret ki'i, the role of hula ki'i in 2020. What they would have been 100 years ago, 200 years ago, would have met a different kind of context. But today, and as Hanalei is talking about, the context changes, but we don't want to give up the form. Because that form is what's going to keep us connected. The context can change, but we can still keep the form. So if you have to leave, mahalo for being here. But if you want to stay for 5 more minutes, and Hanalei, can I have 5 more minutes of your time?
Of course
buddy?
you can.
Thank you. Okay. But bye-bye. A good question we have is 5 minutes. Will you notice for people to take? Okay. Where's Mōkaulele's one? Right here. Can you speak of any other material in your experience where you have seen the lei niho palawa was of another medium rather than a sperm whale tooth?
So some of the early, like old examples of small palawa made out of rock oyster. So that's one of another material that was used. There's examples of pohaku being carved into palawa. I know there's a tradition for the Hilo chiefs to have their palawa made out of hau. Yeah, the hau wood. I've never seen an example of a palawa from made from that material, but those are the stories connecting to the some of the different materials. But yeah, I think the materials that I've seen physically were the rock oyster, which are they're really small, just because the material itself is a very small small material. and then pohaku.
You know, this discussion, we're looking at regalia, and if you were on the Mauna during the time when people were standing to keep development from further desecration of their space, of our space, you would see people coming up in regalia. Some of them in full regalia, some of them in partial regalia. You would see the ie, the mahi ole, hulu ole. You would have the, you know, you had different. Some of the males were using their mahi ole, and you already immediately knew that they were a leader in this. When you have 5,000 people gathered, sometimes these regalias help us identify who's the leader. You saw the women wearing some of the hair in different styles. You know, people are picking up regalia as a way of indicating their service to the moment. And then what they did was it inspired a lot of kids from not just being the May Day king, so you can wear the silk cape and the tissue mahi ole, but now it began to inspire kids saying, how do you get one of those? And that's a good question, because, you know, the people that were gifted the mahi ole was because the community, there was a community that believed this mahi ole would protect them, would protect their energy as it reflects the greater lahui. And so that's one. You see that's happening. There's a new need. You're seeing the cords that are coming out. At one time, everybody stopped wearing cords. You never saw, we have one artifact with cords, and something tells us we had more artifacts with cords. It just happened we have one. Lucky we have one. So people, like a small community, has now committed to bringing that cord back. And so you're beginning to see the cord being used. So these regalias, because again, this cord, like the lauoho in the Palawa, is one long cord. And for us, that long cord is very significant because it reminds us that we descend from a very long line of Ieve. It's just not a reminder, it's a kuleana. See, so this is the thing I think we want to drive home in our closing thoughts here, is that we can recreate the artifact. And some of us, we have to do it because we choose. Why not create these artifacts and make a lifestyle versus doing something you really don't like, and the things that really connect you, they don't have a front row priority with you because you have to pay the bills. So that's one decision that artists have to figure out how to negotiate. Because there's still a lot of taboos, real and imagined taboos on how we do what we do when we do. And we don't want to just give it up, because those couples keep us connected. We have to evolve them, but on our terms and in our times. The other thing is Samoa is going through a similar situation, whereas the tattoo for the males came with a whole huge service to your community, commitment to that community, but now they're having to entertain people from the outside, Samoan or non-Samoan, coming to the villages and wanting to get a pi'a. Some of the tattoo kahunas will say no, and some of them will say yes. Now, who's right, who's wrong? And that's not the discussion. The discussion is these people have to make these decisions based on their connection to the ancestors, and only they can make those decisions. So not, again, the point is not because we're offered the article, that means we wear it. Sometimes we're given something not for us to wear, but for our mo'opuna to wear. And so our job is just to hold it, just to keep it. Sometimes we're given stuff and we don't know how to, we can't wear it now, but when we mature in a few years, we understand why it was given to us. So these are all the unsaid cultural currents that help us determine, are we going to wear it? We're not going to wear it. When are we going to wear it? For what purpose are we going to wear it? Do we have the rights to wear it? Aren't they good questions? Because if these things that we put on our bodies, especially in high ritual, is to concentrate our connection to our ancestors, that's a serious, commitment. Now, if you're making a nice feather cape and it's going to hang on the wall, then hopefully the intention was for that. Or you're making a feather cape because there was a feather cape that was gifted on the Mauna. One family gifted it to another family in recognition of their leadership. People just cried because we don't see that too often. So sometimes the gifting is huge. Everything else is just material. And so I like that you shared that, Hanalei, that they may look alike, but they come with different intentions. The other side to that is, if you're going to wear it, you have to pull it off. That's what we're trained in culture. You cannot just put on this long kihei, drag them on the floor, and then go to the ball with it, unless it was made for the ball. But if it's made for ceremony, then the intention is, in fact, if you miswear it, you could cause a lot of imbalance if you miswear ʻAʻahu. So many things to think about. And I think, as I've known Hanalei for years, and we spend really nice time just talking. We don't talk very often these days because of the situations, but we connect. And so you people who identify as artists, some of you who are having to take cultural risks to just grow your contribution, keep your ancestors close. And sometimes if it doesn't come from your ancestors, and maybe your families are not the right support for you because they just don't know how, then there are people in a community that will support you. If the artifact needs to have a new life, a new function, you'd be surprised there's somebody in your neighborhood that's able to take it to the next step. So sometimes it's not our family, sometimes it's someone else. Sometimes you have to come to the university system, or it's through your public school system or your charter school system that you relearn culture. So, we're redefining what used to come through the family is now coming through another kind of family definition. So we leave that with you. We ask you to, invite, to learn from a master, because you can easily pick up a YouTube video and follow hula and teach yourself hula through a video, but there's the human piece that's missing. The artifact sometimes, or the making of the article, is only the medium to connect with the other human being and all of their ancestors. It's only the canoe. So I want to thank Hanalei, and Hanalei and I, and together with Keli'i, are actually talking about putting together a small conference on cord and ʻAʻahu. And hopefully we have the energies and the time to further that, because Hawaii is wanting this discussion. And I think we have enough experiences to rely not just on research, but rely on our own experiences and trust our ancestors. So again, Hanalei, mahalo nui. I mahalo all your teachers. I mahalo your ancestors for sticking with you even when you were not picking up the lauhala. I like to think that they knew that a mo'opuna was going to pick it up someday, and you were the mo'opuna. And interestingly, that zing that went through your body didn't stop at lauhala. It was just the door into a connection, into a greater service. So thank you for servicing Hawaii and servicing your own ancestors in the process. Anything else I want to say? So you emerging leaders or you emerging artists, again, it's not just about the artifact. There's a rich culture. Whenever we learn hula, we don't just learn the hula, we learn the story behind the hula. And sometimes it's not the story about the hula, it's the story of how the hula was passed down. That's the value. So there's dances that I know, I don't really know what I'm dancing about. Generally I know, but it's the story that song is attached to. That's the mana. So honor your teachers, learn well, don't be too rushed. Do your best not to compromise, grow the culture, respect the culture, especially if it's not your primary culture. If someone else's culture is giving you life and meaning, then I invite you to come to it with a little bit more concern and awareness, and with the right permissions to proceed. But mahalo to everyone. I want to mahalo Gail Makuakan in London and her vision to create platforms such as this. I want to mahalo my friends. I have good, smart friends, artist friends. Yay. I have some Lolo ones, but I call them for other kinds of opportunities. We all, sometimes I'm just really Lolo, and I like that too. It relieves some of my tensions. But we celebrate all of you, and we mahalo those tutus for leaving us this information, leaving us with enough skill. Yeah, we lament, oh, they took all this, they died and colonized. Yeah, we can sing that song. But when we turn around and we look at what they left us with everything we need. So let's do our part to make it live again in our way that's meaningful to us. Hanalei, mahalo anui, ahui ho no kako. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you, Tiffany, for working this technology out. Ahui ho.
Yo, mahalo nui.
Okay, thank you, Hanalei.